Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Israel, to India, and to people that hear us from wherever you are. My name is Anat Bernstein-Reich. I'm the Vice President of the Israel-Asia Chamber of Commerce, and I'm also the Chairperson of Israel, India, and Nepal Chamber of Commerce. We have with us distinguished guests from India and Israel, and a lot of Israeli companies and Indian companies participating in this morning webinar. For the Indians, it's a Sunday, but I told all the Indians anyway, you're in lockdown. What else you can do but to join our webinar today? So thanks for joining. This event started small. Initially, Mr. Ramana, the CEO of State Bank in Israel, we were to do a small breakfast for CFOs talking about the Indian economy, some tradition we started a while back. But then when Dr. Ghosh agreed to join us this morning, we said, why to limit it only to a very few? Why won't we open it to more Israeli companies? And then Indian companies wanted to join too. And we have a big party this morning with a lot of guests and dignitaries from Israel and India. Just some housekeeping rules for our webinar. Most of you are attendees which are not allowed to talk or operate their video during this part of the call. It will be easier to manage it. However, later we will allow people to open their video, ask questions, and towards the end, we will also do a group video. So if you'd like us to open your video, please dress up and prepare for that. If you have questions, you can place them on the Q&A place and address them to a certain panelist or to panelists. And you have the chat where you can say good morning and how wonderful this webinar is, but don't place your questions on the chat, only on the Q&A. Liron, our webinar administrator, will approach you and will let you when you'll be have a permission to bring your question, but you can start now sending questions and we will attend to them as we go and mainly at the end of the session. So I will start with Ambassador of India to Israel, His Excellency Mr. Sanjeev Singla. Sanjeev, you're here. Can we?
Anat,
Yes.
Mr. Sanjeev is giving a message that he's not having the audio still. Can you please check that? Yeah.
Sanjeev, can you say a word and I'll tell you if I hear you or not?
He's on mute.
Yeah, just a sec. Please, if I'm not approaching you, please keep your mics shut for a while, otherwise it will be a mess. Sanjeev, I'm afraid I cannot hear you yet.
No, I'm messaging, I'm texting to him. He said still no audio, and his audio is on, but then he's not able to hear. No, he's not able to hear.
Yeah, I see that.
Can you talk to him on his mobile and guide him to get on there, or someone from your office, like?
Okay. In the meantime, I'll pass the mic to you, Ambassador of Israel in India. His Excellency Ron Malka is with us. Ron?
Yes. Good morning, Israel, and good afternoon, India.
Good morning, Mr. Ron.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome. Thank you so much, Anat, and all the organizers for initiating this important meeting. You know, the days of global crisis, the cooperation, and especially the cooperation with friendly nations, close friends like India and Israel, is so important. This will shape the way that we'll conduct our actions in the future. And now, understanding the implications of the stimulus package that Minister Modi has just announced, the implications of this package on the Israeli companies, foreign companies in general, but especially Israeli companies that we want to encourage to come to India and to cooperate and to work together for the benefit, of course, of both countries and the companies themselves. It's very important for us to know how does this package really affect the way of doing business, the ease of doing business, what are the changes in the regulations, what incentives are there, because as far as the impression that I get, there are many, many economic incentives which make this package very promising, I would say. And understanding the properties of this package will enable us to conduct our actions much, much better. And this cooperation, business to business, is so important for the relations of our two countries, as I said, for what will be there in the future. So I just want to thank again Anat and all those that organized, and I'm looking forward to hear what Dr. Ghosh has to say, especially about how Israeli companies can understand this package and use it just their business is much, much better. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you, Ron. And thanks for joining us this morning. I understand that you're coming tomorrow to Israel.
Yes, exactly.
So we look forward to having you here after so long. And I understand that Ambassador of India to Israel is now audible. Mr. Sanjeev?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Good morning. Good morning. Yes, sir, we are able to hear.
Okay. Now, shalom and namaste. It's great to be with all of you in this webinar today morning. It's a good initiative taken by the State Bank of India, Tel Aviv, and Anat, Israel Asia and Israel India Nepal Chambers of Commerce. I'm happy to see our friend Ambassador Ron Malka, and I'm very happy to note that he's flying in from Delhi tomorrow. Mr. Satyanarayana, Dr. Ghosh, Mr. Ravi Byron, Mr. Benjamin Grossman, and of course, Mr. Ramana. It's also good to see the representatives of Invest India. I'm told they are joining in today morning, and they've done some commendable work in hand-holding investors keen to do business in India. I'm sure our Israeli friends here will find a very valuable resource in Invest India. Let me set the ball rolling by touching upon two broad themes. Firstly, let me say a word about the state of our health, the situation of the coronavirus pandemic in India. The good news is that given India's huge size of 1.3 billion people, it has done remarkably well so far. While the total number of cases is about 130,000, the number of active cases is about 74,000 or so, and doubling in about 15 days. The recovery rate is over 40% and improving steadily. The total deaths have been less than 4,000, giving us a mortality rate of less than 3 per million, which is one of the lowest in the world. The daily testing has been increased sharply, over 100,000 tests daily, and we've done about 2.8 million tests so far. And the most crucial transmission factor, R naught, which measures the number of people that can be infected by one person, has been declining steadily. It's currently estimated at about 1.22. Target, of course, is to push it below 1 to contain the virus. And there are some states within India, like Punjab and Haryana, where R naught has already gone below 1. But the broad point to remember here is that government in India acted very swiftly and effectively, much quickly than most OECD countries, if I may say so, to contain the virus. And that should be reassuring to any investor. In fact, based on modeling projections by independent agencies, the government's quick action actually averted at least 1.4 million additional cases. Yes, there are many challenges which remain. For instance, we haven't hit the peak yet, something that is expected perhaps next month. And one state alone, Maharashtra, accounts for over 40% of all our active cases. And within Maharashtra, again, the epicenter is really Mumbai. But we are getting there. Like in Israel, our focus is now turned to strategies for a cautious and gradual reopening. Even if we take the case of Maharashtra, over 70,000 manufacturing units have already gained approvals to restart manufacturing, and over 46,000 have already resumed operations. Secondly, let me say a word about the state of our economy. Now, as investors, I can understand it's very natural that you would be grappling with questions regarding the impact of the virus on Indian economy, how fast the economy would recover. Well, there was an interesting analysis by Nobel Prize winning economist Paul Krugman last week. I thought I'll share it with you. Essentially, the point he made was that if you look at the recessions from the last century to the last one this century, which is the 2008 financial crisis, the recoveries happened much faster in those cases when there were no major underlying problems in the economy and the shocks were imposed from outside, as in the case of coronavirus, which has forced us to shut down large parts of the economy, provided, of course, you handle the pandemic carefully. Now, that should be some cause for optimism for the Indian economy because A, it went into the pandemic in fairly sound macroeconomic health. B, is using the pandemic to carry out further structural economic reforms, which open up more opportunities for investors like you. And C, it is managing the pandemic reasonably well. Let me explain. It's very difficult to assess the impact of the virus on any economy for the simple reason that it's a unique event which has never happened in history. So if this virus is an emergency illness, then how well the patient will do essentially depends to a large extent on how healthy the patient was before being afflicted with this illness. And on that count, India was doing quite well. We were the fastest growing major economy in the world. Given the business cycle duration in India, quarterly GDP growth was expected to recover in the second half of this year. Fiscal deficit was prudent. Credit growth was picking up in personal loans and agriculture. Dr. Ghosh will tell you that. The non-performing assets were going down. The trade deficit was going down. Current account deficit was declining. The foreign direct investment was rising. Foreign exchange reserves were at an all-time high. GST revenues were growing. Overall debt levels, a very crucial indicator, were moderate compared to other countries. And the bankruptcy code was facilitating the idea of creative destruction. And we had made a dramatic jump in the ease of doing business rankings to 63rd place. So the overall health was good, really. Now, what the government has done is to use this event as an opportunity to usher in more structural reforms in the nearly $265 billion stimulus package, almost 10% of our GDP, which it announced a few days ago, and through measures announced by state governments. And let me take this moment to mention a few which may be of interest to you. I'm sure Dr. Ghosh will elaborate more on them. For instance, labor sector, where states like Uttar Pradesh, which is the largest state in India, Gujarat and Madhya Pradesh, have exempted business from virtually all labor laws, except 3 or 4 essential ones for 3 years. Agriculture sector, which would be of interest to Israel, reforms now allow contract farming. They promote private investment in building cold chains, dairy processing, as also allow the farmer to sell his produce to anybody in the country where interstate barriers on the movement of agricultural produce are going to be removed. So essentially, this will help the farmer to get better income and allow the entry of big players in agriculture. Defense sector, again, another sector of interest to Israel, where now there is a greater emphasis and facilitation for manufacturing defense equipment in India. And more equally importantly, foreign companies can now invest directly up to 74% in joint ventures, giving them control. Water sector, again, an area of interest to Israel, where the states now have an incentive to charge user fees for water, so as to qualify for higher borrowing from the federal center. Space sector, which is an area of budding cooperation between India and Israel. Private sector has now been given a level playing field to build complete satellites and rocket launchers, and allowed access to our space research organization facilities, as well as participation in projects like planetary exploration. Corporate sector, where violations of many provisions of the Companies Act have been decriminalized. COVID-related debts excluded from the bankruptcy code for 1 year, and very important, private companies have been allowed direct listing in permissible foreign jurisdictions. Health sector. This is a very crucial area because in future, I'm sure the investors are first going to ask whether a particular country can cope with another wave of the pandemic. And here the news is that the total expenditure is now going to be increased substantially, and medical infrastructure developed at primary level especially infectious diseases, hospitals, and diagnostic labs. And apart from all these areas, there is, of course, tremendous opportunity in the cybersecurity sector, where Israel has considerable strengths. And if anything, COVID-19 has only increased the relevance of this sector. It is growing at a rate of over 20% per annum in India and expected to be over $13 billion in India in the next 5 years, with banking, financial services and insurance, telecom and IT as key verticals. And there are various states, in addition to all these reforms, which are focusing on specific areas. For instance, Haryana, as I mentioned, it has already gone, the R0 value in Haryana has just dipped below 1. It has identified sectors like home healthcare, auto parts manufacturing, aerospace and ICT, including AI, 5G, and blockchain. So I'm sure now you have a lot of questions, especially for Dr. Soumya Ghosh. So let me end by an anecdote. In my previous appointment, I had the privilege of attending many investor roundtables all over the world with some of the world's biggest fund managers and CEOs. And invariably in those meetings, there are presentations on the economy. But I'll never forget the sum and substance, which was stated by some very seasoned investors in one of those meetings. And they said, Mr. Prime Minister, we are used to seeing these presentations. And we understand the ups and downs of any economy. But what we really look to understand better in such meetings with you is the long-term trajectory of the economy and your conviction to back that trajectory with a stable policy framework. And I think those are wise words. And on that count, as investors looking to diversify either for hedging or on account of rising wages elsewhere, you should have little doubt. So let me stop here. Toda Rabba and Shag Shavuot Sameach. Thank you.
Thank you. Chag Shavuot Sameach. For the Indians among us, later this week we have an agriculture holiday called Shavuot, and we're starting to prepare for that. Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. I'd like to pass the mic to Mr. BRS Satya Narayana, which is the Chief General Manager, International Banking Group at the State Bank of India. Mr. Satya was here in last June, actually, and it's good to see you again, Mr. Satya.
Thank you, Anat, and good morning to my Israeli friends, and good afternoon. His Excellency Ambassador Singla and His Excellency Dr. Ron, pleasure seeing you and listening to you. Dr. Ghosh will detail about the policy responses and policy initiatives taken by the Government of India. I would like to share the State Bank perspective in how I support the incoming investors from Israel. We have a dedicated manpower situated in Delhi and Bombay. We have a Japan desk, we have a Korea desk, who cater exclusively to these investors coming from these two countries. So these gentlemen, they provide all sorts of support. They identify the taxation, the legal people, and coordinate with various agencies so that incoming investors are provided with the necessary support. Of all the things, any incoming investor, what he requires is funding. He needs money for his working capital. He needs money for setting up the project. He needs money for capital expansion. This is where we will step in, and what we have designed for Japan and Korea, we will be replicating the same here also. It is based on a simple SBLC issued by the Israel Bank through our Tel Aviv office. Based on that, the investor will be getting very attractive loan schemes, and the interest rate is very, very attractive. So these are some of the schemes where we can directly provide support, the financial assistance to the incoming investors. And my CEO in Tel Aviv will be able to guide you all the investors in how to manage things. And once you decide to come to India, we are here to support you in all the banking related issues. And I think I'll stop here. As we go along, if any question comes up, I'll come back to you. But rest assured, State Bank of India is here to support you in all your endeavors in India. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Satya. Although the CEO of State Bank of India asked not to say a few words, you can just say good morning so people know you and know who is the person behind this conspiracy.
Thank you, Anat. Good morning to you. Good morning, Mr. Sanjeev Singla, Ambassador, Indian Ambassador to Israel, Mr. Ron, Israeli Ambassador to India, our Chief General Manager, Mr. B.R.S. Satyanarayana, and the Chief Guest of the Day, Dr. Soumya Kanti Ghosh. Thank you for taking your time to attend this webinar. In fact, this has been planned by both of us, me and Anat, a few days back, and luckily we were able to bring it on so well. I'm very happy that all of you are, finding time and sparing your time to be here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Ramana. We have colleagues here from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Our Consul General from Bangalore is here, Mrs. Dana Korsh. Dana, if you have a video, you can say hi. We have Mrs. Tami Ziv, head of the India desk at the Economic Division, and Mr. Ronnie Yedidia, which is going to be the DCM soon in Delhi. Ronnie, why won't you just say hi so people will know you? We will later, of course, introduce you properly.
Hi. Hi, everyone.
Ronnie is going to work with Dr. Malka this coming August, I guess, if the corona allows, of course.
On the first flight.
Yes. Our colleagues from the Ministry of Economy of Industry are also here, Mr. Tzafrir Asaf, and we have the commercial attaches from Bangalore, Dr. Shai Moses. Shai, you can say hi. And Mr. Barak Leonot is with us. And we have Sagi Icher from Mumbai. Everybody had time this morning. It's really nice of you to join. And we have also Mrs. Natasha Zangin, which is going to replace Barak in Delhi. Natasha, why won't you say hi so people know the face that will replace the big shoes of Barak?
Hi, good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to meet you all.
Thank you, Natasha. We will meet Natasha later next month for a one-to-one with all the companies. Mr. Raviv Byron, President of the Israel, India and Nepal Chamber of Commerce is with us. Raviv, why won't you just say a few words?
Good morning, India, Israel. Good afternoon, India. Anat, thank you very much for organizing this. Thank you to the State Bank of India, to Mr. Satyanam. And I'd like to thank the State Bank of India for taking this initiative and organizing this seminar. I think it's very important. Thank you to the two ambassadors, Dr. Ron Malka and to Ambassador Sanjay Sangli, for being with us. I think it's very important. I have to admit that I am very, very curious to hear Dr. Ghosh's presentation, because I've been working in India for over 30 years. I have never once stopped being optimistic, never once. I have to admit that right now I'm starting to get a little bit of stomach worries about what's happening. I can see that for the first time in decades, India's GDP is expected not to grow and maybe even go negative.
Raviv, we're taking the stage for Dr. Ghosh for his projection.
Correct. This is why, I'm worried, and I'm looking to Dr. Ghosh to calm me down. The Ambassador Sanjay was quite optimistic, and I'm hoping that this is what we're going to hear for continue. I'm looking forward to a continued optimistic scenario. Thank you very much to everybody.
Great. Thank you, Raviv. We have also the President, Matan Vilnai, with us. Matan, just show your face so people will see you. Matan is the President of the Israel Asia Chamber of Commerce. Everybody wanted to be with us this morning, so thanks for taking the time.
Take your time. I came to hear, not to give a speech, but I'm the former Israeli ambassador to Beijing, and I'm a former general in the army. Our ambassador in Delhi served under my command. Aaron, don't tell the secrets.
Yes.
And
Remember that.
Ex-minister, and I would like to hear about Indian economy as much as I can, because it's very important for Israel. The relation between India and Israel are very important, I believe, for both sides, and I'm anxious to listen to you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Matan. I'll pass the mic briefly to our partner for this event, APM Law. And we have with us Advocate Benjamin Grossman, Head of their Legal Practice in APM Law. Benjamin?
Yeah, good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'll cut it very short. What I realized in the last 3 months since we tackled this conflict, the three kinds of nations' reactions. One is those in denial, one those in very offensive, and there's a third kind, which is the lemonade makers, and this is India. Quite from the beginning, India tried to see how they can make benefit in the long run from this. And I don't want to say again what Ambassador Sigler said, but it's quite clear that they want to get out of it in a very different position from what they got into it in the beginning. And this is a great opportunity for Israeli companies, which are very open-minded for this kind of collaborations with Indian companies. What I like to see is, to be more specific, what are the opportunities for the MSMEs and what kind of sectors want to be the most beneficial from this incentives and boost that is now given by the government. I promise to make it short, so I believe I comply with my promise.
Thank you, Mr. Grossman. I see that Dana from Bangalore joined, so to see your lovely face this morning, just say hi to everyone from Bangalore.
Shalom, namaskar, everyone.
Great, thanks for joining us. We are also joined by Mr. Mankotia from Invest India, which will join us at the Q&A session later on. And we have Danica Torivas from the Manufacturer Association and many more. My network down. And many more friends. And Mr. Ghosh, it's your turn now. So we have with us today Dr. Soumya Kanti Ghosh. He is the Group Chief Economic Advisor to the State Bank of India. Previously, he has worked at Tata, AIA, American Express, and other companies. Dr. Ghosh has been the co-author in a pioneering work to capture payroll data in India for the first time, both formal and informal. And following his report, the Employees Provident Fund Organization and the Employees State Insurance Corporation has started to give out monthly payroll data. Dr. Ghosh is currently a member of the working group that has been set by the Government of India for the revision of the Wholesale Price Index. He serves as a member in the Indian Banks Association Monetary Policy Group and provided inputs to the Reserve Bank of India, to RBI Expert Committee to revise and strengthen the monetary policy framework. He is also a member of SEBI, the Securities Exchange Board of India, and in 2018 and 2019, Dr. Ghosh has been ranked as one of the best individuals in research in India by the Asset magazine. Dr. Ghosh received his PhD in economics from Jawaharlal Nehru University. So with all this, Dr. Ghosh, you can open your mic.
Yeah.
You are. Why don't you
Thank you. Thank you for a nice introduction, and good morning to everyone. His Excellency ambassadors to India and to Israel, and the Chamber of Commerce, and Anat, and also our CEO at Mr. Ramanna, who took the pain of organizing it along with the Anat, and also our CGM, Mr. Satyanarayana. So good morning to all of you. And it's a pleasure to address you. And today, as I am speaking since India has been in a lockdown mode for the last 2 months, even though the banking sector which we are working in is actually in an overdrive mode, because since the lockdown has taken place, as you know, the State Bank of India, which has a 20% share, is Indian GDP. So we have been actually working to ensure that all these measures which the government has announced is actually is implemented and taken to the grassroots. So basically SBI is also, and I'll say a few words about SBI at the end. But before I start today, I think the structure of my presentation, which I will go through, is basically to give you an idea about how India was going before COVID, and what India has done in COVID, and what are the next steps after COVID. So that will give you a brief introduction of what is the current status. I will share the slides after some modifications, and I will request Anna to share the slides whenever I send it. I've shared it a draft version right now. But before I start the presentation, I'll just decipher a small quotation. This is actually from a piece which I wrote 2 days back on this, which our Honorable Prime Minister has announced in terms of Atmanirbhar Bharat, which means a self-reliant India. So basically, there has been a lot of talk about this package about Atmanirbhar, and I will also try to give you whatever possible short span of on this package. But I'd like to start with a 1957 quote by David McCord-Wright in his Open Sector Economic Growth, where he had said that the fundamental factors making for economic growth are non-economic and non-materialistic in character. It is the spirit itself that actually builds the body. So something actually like this comes to my mind when I will decipher on the Atmanirbhar package, which the government has, which our Prime Minister announced, and the government has actually taken it forward to implement it after the COVID-19 crisis. So with these words, I will start the presentation. If you can kindly start it. And yeah, the first slide, if you can just go to the first slide, yeah. The second slide, please. Yeah, see, the first history is basically about India, is that Indian history of pandemics, if you look into that, actually has a history of 500 years. If you look into all this history, why I'm giving this history is basically is very important to understand the current crisis. The point is that all pandemic crises has a secondary waves. So therefore, whatever each country is doing, you can always tell whether it is, you can always have a debate whether it is adequate or inadequate. But the important thing to note is that all crises from starting from 15th century, when we had the smallpox, right down to the swine flu in 2009-10, has multiple waves. And I think the 1918 to 20 crisis actually had 3 waves, and in the third wave there was around 8% death. So we should be very careful in understanding what is the history of pandemics. But the important point, and I will mention in one of my slides, is that the population actually also has developed a herd mentality in the last several years. If you remember, if there is a government data which you often miss out, is that in 2018 we had around 4 crore people who were infected with this pneumonia, but only 3,740 died. So even with the current health infrastructure, and as our ambassador was mentioning, we have done remarkably well in terms of containing the disease, even though it is not 1,30,000, but also in terms of containing other diseases over this point of time. So there is actually the hope which I derive from the current pandemic, even though there will be some, of course, some genuine challenges to the Indian economy will face because of the COVID. Next slide.
Yes.
Yeah. So this is basically the issue. This is a 7-day moving average of new cases which I have just plotted. You can look into some of the successful examples like Luxembourg, South Korea, then Austria, Sweden, Slovakia. But Indian case, you can see that the curve is rising. We actually did an estimate, and since we are not epidemiologist experts, but we did a 7-day moving average, and we found out that the peak of India could possibly come in the mid of June. So that's why, but after mid of June, there will be a significant decline, and possibly things will start getting to normal in the month of July. So we may have some amount of pain still left in the next couple of fortnights. Next slide. So this is basically what India has done. This is the slide which I wanted to show you a progression from 100 to 1,28,000. India reached that target in 114th day. And as you see, all other countries are actually much earlier than that. China data is not available. China data is not available for 1,28,000. But if you look into all other countries, you can see that India has done remarkably well in terms of containing the disease. US 10 lakh case came on the 101st day when India was at 64,000. And this is the age-wise distribution. So that is also one of the reasons India's fatality rate is actually around less than 3%. Is that most of the people, if you go back to the last slide once and just once. Thank you. Yeah, so you can just see that the people who are being infected are basically the people in the 21 to 40s, around 45% people. So therefore, our fatality rate is actually also on the lower side. Yeah, next slide. Now, what is the global economic outlook? The global economic outlook actually looks a little bleak this year. There has been projections which is saying that the output could decline by 4 to 5%, and if our global GDP size of around 84 trillion, so there is a decline of around 3 to 4%. India has a 3.5% share. So India will also face some amount of link from that. FDI is expected to decline by 30 to 40%. Financial markets have been significantly volatile. Both debt and equity, 59 billion has actually gone out from emerging economies since this crisis started. And the important point is that there is a risk of relapse, because there are cases which are showing that in Korea and some other countries, there is a risk of relapse, but that is basically still a tiny proportion of total cases cured. So basically, this is still, we are in uncertain territory until and unless a vaccine is discovered. Yeah, next slide. COVID basically is new challenge, and I'll just take 2 minutes to explain this cycle, because this is an important point. This crisis is likely to have a much bigger impact on the global financial crisis, because in this crisis is that we are actually foregoing social consumption, which is basically meals out, concerts, travel, and India's share of service sector is 60%. So basically, you cannot make up for this social consumption which you are foregoing today, and that is the problem, and that is the difference between the financial crisis in 2009-10, because at that point of time we could recover our consumption quickly, but at this point of time it will be difficult for us to recoup the consumption, and India, as you know, is a consumption driven economy. And policymakers are also in a dilemma, because medical community is still researching whether the contracting the virus will make people immune in the long term. For example, the measles virus, this is the case for measles virus, but it is not the case for other viruses like dengue. So we have to understand that the social distancing is not a sufficient condition. So so lockdown basically may not be the ultimate solution, but it could be one of the solutions to build up the health infrastructure. FDI is going to, and these slides have already said. So the point is that given that the vaccine is at least a year away, strict containment policies cannot last for 1 year, and we have to live with this possibly the COVID for some point of time right now. Next slide. Yeah, this is the GDP forecast for different regions. I think for Germany, all other countries are going to be in deep negative. India also will be in the negative territory. I'll come to that Indian data in a while, but this is going to be a significant impact and far larger, I emphasize, than the global financial crisis. Next slide. This is basically what are the reactions after COVID. There has been a reorganization of supply chains. I will come to that. How can India can benefit from the supply chains? Japan is actually budgeting for Japanese firms to move out of China. The locations are India, Vietnam, Bangladesh, Mexico. There has been a rise of US-China trade tension. Some disruption in supply of key inputs. Trade deal could be in jeopardy. There has been increase in unemployment. Talks of basic income support going down. There has been restrictions of Chinese capital. European India and India, Australia are putting Chinese capital on an approval route. Increase in geopolitical tensions like Taiwan and North Korea. So there is actually some of the things which are happening after COVID. Next slide. Yeah. Now, what I would like to talk a little bit of the pre-COVID status. If you can see about the pre-COVID status, actually Indian economy, and as you can see, after mirroring the global economic growth rate, Indian economy, which was actually growing till FY17, has witnessed some sort of a contraction in FY20. And FY20, the growth rate projections was around 5% by the CSO when the crisis broke out. We think this number can now be a little bit on the downside. But this is basically, we had an fast GDP projections from FY14 from around 6% to we reach 8.2% in FY17. After that, there has been a slowdown, and unfortunately, the COVID crisis came at a time when the Indian economy was just about to recover after the announcement of the budget. Next slide. Now, this is basically the important thing. There's been a lot of talk about this asset quality of the banking system. I want to take this point from the beginning. This is the data of the last 26 years of the Indian banking system. You can see that we have faced far worse crises earlier years. In FY94, we have the ratio of 20%. This came down to 2.2%. It went up to FY18 to 11.2. And this number actually has been declining from FY18 onwards. So basically, there could be, and the important point is that the provisioning coverage ratio of the civil commercial banks has significantly increased. That means that the banking system now was adequately covered in terms of this asset quality before the crisis struck us. Next slide. This is some of the data which I wanted to say. India is now around 2.7 trillion economy. I have taken the data from 2018 because nothing much has changed. India was the 6th billion economy. You can see the number of tax filing records. FY19, it was actually, it went up from 29.7 people who were filing taxes. It went up to 66.8 million. Basically around 70, close to 70 million people who are paying taxes, which has more than doubled in the last 5 years. In the last 5 years, more than close to 400 million people have been included in the formal banking channels to the Prime Minister Jan Dhan Yojana. There has been also a Jan Dhan Surakha to giving insurance to people, and the amount is basically 160 million. So these are very large numbers. So these are some of the programs which the Indian government has been running in terms of the social inclusion and for the poor and the downtrodden people. So therefore, I think, and given the fact that we have built up the infrastructure of this JAM means basically Jan Dhan Aadhaar Mobile. That means the sense that the Indian government now transfers all the money through the digital channel, and that is the reason why a record amount of money, I think around 50,000 crore, which is Indian rupees 500 billion. So if you divide it by 770, so that means around, close to 15 to 20 billion amount of money was transferred by the government within the span of in the last 2 months, because we have the required infrastructure right now, and that actually could hold us in good state in the coming days. Next slide. These are some of the things which we have done. Unbanked population declined from 50 to 55%. DBT benefits of 108 billion transferred. This number has gone up significantly. IBC, the recovery rate has now 43%, which is up from 14%. We have done GST, monthly collection 13 to 15 billion. RERA we have done 42,000 projects, 32,000 agents registered. There has been a significant clampdown on the black economy. Tax I-filing has doubled, and many other things the government has done. Benami bill, the mining auction of natural resources. So the reforms agenda has been over the years of increased governance and increased transparency. So this actually is one of the issues, one of the things which will leave us in good state in the coming days as we prepare for an after COVID world. Next slide. And this is basically again some of the people. You can see some of the numbers which is phenomenal. For example, e-governance drive. In 2018, the total number of e-governance drive was basically 98 million transactions, which was up from 6.5 million. Digital foundation, Jan Dhan account holders, other linked bank accounts, gig economy, digital value chains, more financial data to lend to MSME farmers. Everything is now digitized. So that is the important point which I like to highlight in this slide. Estimated incremental transfers credit of 1 to 1.3 trillion, which we had done actually from the last the several years. Next slide. This is now I'll come to some of the things which these are all before COVID. So basically this is the Indian ease of doing business ranking. You can see that India has moved from 142 to 63 in 2019. And some of the things which we are still trying to work is basically getting credit and enforcing contracts. I think this will improve as the IBC gets implemented. But I think insolvency, trading across borders, dealing with construction permits, India has done remarkably well in the last 5 years as we have tried to simplify the ease of doing business. Next slide. Now this is also in terms of the global competitiveness index. Basically in terms of all these parameters, in terms of the macroeconomic parameters, India has moved up. The product market, India has moved up. The market size is still the third. There has been some amount of India has a rank of actually 68 in the Acosta Global Competitiveness Index, and India's market size is basically significantly on the higher side. So this is also another thing which is which you need to understand, is that over the years India has improved on its competitiveness index. There has been some small minor changes in 2018 to 19, but hopefully this will also improve in the coming years as India has embarked on this path of significant reforms in the Atmanirbhar package which the government has announced. Next slide. This is some of the sectors in Make in India. I will not get into this, but automotive renewable energy. I'll talk a little bit about these sectors in the later. Roads and highways, pharmaceutical, food processing, and electronic system and manufacturing. Next slide. Now, what is the impact of COVID-19? Now, GDP estimates basically when the first time the India imposed a lockdown, our GDP estimates actually was 5.7%. We cut it down to 2.6%. After that, we had cut it down to 1.1%. But right now, the number is actually in the negative territory. So we'll have a contraction in the GDP in the current year. But this is basically on the flip side. And this is basically doing a bottoms up approach, sorry, this should be bottoms up approach, because the point is that India has 29 states and all the states have been categorized into green, red and zone. So we have to understand that some of the sectors are not some of these zones are not working. So if you do an analysis, Indian growth could actually be a little bit on the negative territory in the last year. But I will give you some good news is that we have been opening up some of the sectors. And our projection is that as you open up some of these sectors, the bounce back could be very strong. In fact, our first quarter GDP number is a significant contraction, which is April to June. But July to September could actually be a significant scale up because a lot of this pent up demand is going to bounce back. And we are already saying, for example, today there is a news item in the paper is that oil consumption is already up to 65% of the pre-COVID levels. So this is one positive thing which we need to understand, and we need to ensure that this momentum actually we are able to keep in the second half of this current fiscal year. Next slide.
Dr. Ghosh, before you progress, Goldman Sachs said last week that India is expected to go to -5% even. Do you agree with their projections?
Yeah, I think the GDP numbers, there is now a broad consensus. I think we had a meeting with the RBI governor last week. So I think the broad consensus is that the GDP contraction could be significantly on the higher side this year. I mean, there are several numbers floating around, but I think it could be even more than 5%. But that's the point which I wanted to mention is that you have to not look into the aggregate figure, which will be negative, but you have to look at quarter-wise. For example, Goldman Sachs has predicted that the first quarter GDP could be a contraction of 45%, but that means even with the 45%, if you are at -5% for the full year, that means for the next 3 quarters, it will be 6 to 7%. And our projections are actually, I think we were the first one to say that the growth could be negative, but our projection is also a little bit similar, but we are also saying that the first quarter could be deep negative. But if suppose the first quarter number is now, the first quarter growth numbers is now, people are showing that it will be -20, -30 or even -40. So even with a -20 to -40% growth in the first quarter, if you are able to log in and negative growth of -5%, that means your quarter 2, quarter 3, quarter 4 growth rate could be 6 to 7%. And I think we should look at this quarter-wise numbers right now instead of the full year number, which obviously will look a little ugly. So that's exactly the point which I want to emphasize in my GDP projection. Next slide. This is basically one, I think there has been some misplaced notion about the rating downgrades, but let me just highlight again. I mean, there has been a lot of this talk about this rating downgrades, but if you look into this Asian crisis during 97-98, Indonesia, South Korea, Thailand, Hong Kong, Malaysia, all these countries actually had not a significant deterioration in fiscal surplus, but they had a significant deterioration in GDP growth. And that's why their rating action went downgraded. So our concern is not a fiscal deficit this year, which is of course going to be, I mean, from 3.5%, it will turn a little more ugly, but our concern is more of a GDP growth this year and how we are able to cope up with that, because that is basically the action on the rating, which I mean, we should understand. So I think we should not be bothered about too much about rating the downgrade at this point of time, which a lot of analysts are also pointing that out. So I wanted to put this slide up front so that's to clear the misconception. Next slide.
Yeah, just a sec. And your projection for the fiscal deficit will go from 3.5 to what? To 6?
It will go more. No, it will go more. It could be more than 7%. It could be more than double than 3.5%.
Which means that we are expecting high inflation?
No, it will not be high inflation, because the point is that when fiscal deficit leads to high inflation is when there is more capacity in the economy. Right now, the capacity in the economy is actually around 50 to 60%. And the second thing is that because of this COVID crisis, people are now holding record amount of cash. So therefore, the currency is not circulating within the economy. So if the currency does not circulate in the economy, so therefore, even if with a higher fiscal deficit, I think inflation is not going to be a problem. So I think there are some of the fundamental changes which has happened in the Indian economy, and you can see that even after the demonetization, when you demonetize the economy, I mean, we took out 86% of the currency, but we brought in 100% of the currency. Even then, the inflation rate was around 2 to 3%. So I think we have materially changed from a high inflation country to a low inflation country, thanks to some of the reforms in the agricultural sector, and also because of the digitization drive which the government and the RBI has been ushered in the last couple of years. So I am not bothered about inflation at all in the current year. In fact, if you take my word today, at the end of the year, you can actually see the inflation going below 2% at some point of time.
Okay, thanks.
Next slide. So this is basically the important point. I think, and I think wanted to highlight this. Good that you asked me this question. I think we had a lot of discussion with this the fiscal deficit, but look into this composition of the fiscal deficit, and this is exactly the, if we make a comparison with Japan, our total government securities, the foreign portfolio investors only hold 3% of the government securities, and the entire amount of ownership pattern is actually held by commercial banks, insurance companies, this domestic market. So basically this makes our fiscal deficit sustainable. So we may have a high fiscal deficit, but we need to understand that the composition of our Indian fiscal deficit is significantly different from other countries like Latin American countries during the crisis, when it basically the total amount of the composition by the foreign portfolio investors were significantly high. So we must remember these data, so that I think so as to clear any misconception about the fiscal position, even if it's a more than double. I think if from 3.5%, the number could be significantly higher, but my sense is that we will not have inflation this year because of the facts which I mentioned, and also because of the fact that our composition of Government of India debtor securities is significantly skewed toward domestic investors like commercial banks, which holds around 35 to 40% of the total papers. And of course, SBI, as you know, contributes 20% of India's GDP. Next slide. Now, some of the good things is that this is one data which nobody is talking. In FY20, we had an oil import of 129 billion. In FY21, this oil import bill could actually decline by 76 billion, and our remittances is also 75 billion last year. So even if I assuming that the remittances becomes completely zero, because there will be decline in remittances, even then we'll have a current account surplus in the next fiscal year, and our balance of payment surplus will be 2.5% of GDP, and this will be the first time in many, I think, 3 decades that India will have a current account surplus. So this is the one positive thing which I wanted to highlight. And 76 billion savings in oil imports, which in rupee terms is a very, very high amount, and that even if we have a remittances decline, then also we'll have an oil, current account surplus in the current fiscal year. Next slide. This is basically some of the opportunity which I wanted to highlight, is that we should convert this crisis into an opportunity. These are some of the real comparative advantage of China and India. As you can see, India has a significantly higher comparative advantage in production of consumer goods, in which a large part of the MSME actually produces these consumer goods, like for example, leathers and others thing. And that's why, you can see that all these, for example, animals, food products, then fuels, then hides and skins, all these items, metals, all these items, minerals, all these items, India has actually a significantly comparative advantage. Stone and glass, textile and clothing, you can see that India's comparative advantage is 3.1 compared to China of 2.1. So I think India should convert this opportunity significantly from trade if we are able to do the proper things. And we are already doing the proper things, which I'll talk about it in some of the next slides. Next slide. See, this is some of the data which I wanted to point out. This is the potential for exports in China's top commodity exports. India basically is, you can see that the Chinese exports are in some of these commodities, and Indian exports of some of these commodities where India has a competitive advantage. As you can see that China, for example, article number 61, apparel, China's exports were 70 billion, Indian exports were 8 billion. So even if I assuming that 1% of demand from China, India is able to capture, that will means that India's incremental export could go by at least 25 billion in 1 year. And if we are able to capture 5%, 100 billion, and 10% is basically 200 billion in the 5-year horizon. So these are not small numbers. So 1% is at the bottom of the pyramid, but that actually translates into a benefit of 20 billion. And I think this is extremely important to understand that India, and the point is that a large part of the MSME are actually competitive advantage in producing these commodities. So I just wanted to put you some of the competitive advantage by which we can make this crisis into an opportunity. Next slide.
Dr. Ghosh, The Economist last week quoted many industrial companies from all over the world saying that they're not going to leave China probably, but they're going to take a strategy which is called China +1. So I guess India would like to be the +1 of China for manufacturing. Do you agree?
Yes. I think that could be one of the options. In fact, I think that's a very interesting question. One of the slides is not here. I can actually add that and send that out. Is that Vietnam, I think, has gained significantly in the last 1 year, but a large part of this is actually Chinese factories setting up shops in the Vietnam. So that could be one of the ways you can look into it, but I'm sure that India can get a lot of advantages if I just look into the data which I have shown over here. So I think that is one of the options which India could do. Now let me get into some of the areas. I think I can get into the slides very quickly. I think the renewable energy is one of the slides where India has actually given a significant push. I mean, total number of 175 gigawatts by 2022. I mean, the government also provides various benefits like gap funding, capital subsidy, and and there has been a significant increase of 37 times from what it was in March 11 to March 2020 in terms of various state policies of Tamil Nadu, Andhra Pradesh, Telangana, Karnataka, and Rajasthan. Next slide. This I also will not go to. I think this is also basically there is a lot of potential in the renewable energy sector. So because India is a tropical country, has huge potential for solar power generation. So the government is actually going all out to support this renewable energy because, as you know, 30% of our imports are actually crude oil imports. Next slide.
And the Israeli companies has a lot of solar solutions.
Yes, exactly.
To our abilities.
Exactly. And this is also another sector, and I will also come to some of the favorite sectors. The agriculture, I think I'll talk to, this is the electrical vehicle sectors. I think the government is already supporting India's move to an electrical vehicle sector. And because of this COVID, we may have a setback, but I think over the next 2 to 3 years, the government is very serious on that. You can see the vehicles on the Indian roads, 2-wheelers, 3-wheelers, 4-wheelers, and premium 4-wheelers. Basically, these buses, the 3-wheelers and 2-wheelers, 79% of the total number of vehicles. So this is a significant markets of that one. And I think the government is also very serious of moving on to an electrical vehicle segment. Next slide.
We just saw in India last month, no, not last month. When I was last, I already saw the electric buses on the road.
Yes, exactly. So this is basically, we can get to the next slide, especially, I mean, significantly, some of the sectors whereby the 2-wheelers and other things. So there are some of the companies, some of the 2-wheelers, all those things. Next slide. And now I'll come to the most important thing, what has been the size of the package. This is an historical one I wanted to give you, is that every country has been giving an stimulus, and this was in 2019 and now it is in 2020. You can see that the size of the package is 2 times larger than that of the global financial crisis, and large part of this also has been in job retention schemes. So basically from 2 times, we have actually moved to larger than 2 times. This is 4% of global GDP is the fiscal stimulus the countries have given, which has moved from 1.5% in 2009. So that's a big number. Next slide.
Just a second. This is the 277 billion scheme that you're talking about?
No, this is basically the average size of the fiscal stimulus in 2020 by all countries and 2009 by all countries. If you look into all countries, it was 1.5% in 2009, and in 2020, on average, countries have given a fiscal stimulus of 4% of GDP. So the point which I'm trying to make is that the size of the stimulus has been much larger and is different from the traditional stimulus which we had given in 2009. when it was mostly public investment. This time we are giving direct cash payments. For example, the Indian government is also giving direct cash payments, job retention schemes, healthcare, and some amount of unemployment insurance. So basically, there is a remarkable similarity in terms of the fiscal stimulus which is being given in 2020 by all the countries, and it is much larger in size than what it was in 2009.
Okay.
Now, this is the data which I wanted to show you, is that what is the size of the Indian tax to GDP ratio? India's fiscal stimulus amount is around 10.5% of GDP, and total direct fiscal outgo will be around 1% of GDP. So we are being fiscally responsible, but at the same time trying to give a stimulus to the economy. And India's fiscal stimulus is remarkably similar to the tax to GDP ratio. The gross state position of the India, I think, in spite of all this talking, is still at 71.9% of center and state. This number actually will go up a little bit, but as you can see, India is much lower than some other countries, and I don't see why India should be bothered about too much about this. I mean, of course, fiscal responsibility is a good thing, but India has been trying to be fiscal responsible in the last couple of years. So this is best, and with a per capita income of $2,010, giving such a fiscal stimulus also means that it was actually innovatively crafted, so that the fiscal impulse is also on the lower side, but we need to get the maximum bang for the buck. Next slide. So this is basically, these slides, this is basically in the Indian numbers, but this is the summary of the entire package which the government has announced in 5 tranches, 21 lakh crores, 21 trillion, 10%, 10 to 10.5% of India's GDP, and 4% of that has been taken by the RBI, but the direct fiscal impact has only been 1%. So the fiscal impact, so basically the point which I'm trying to make is that we have given the package and structured the package in such a manner that we have been able to cover a large part of this, for example, cash subsidy for the poor, the MSME, the guarantee fund for the MSME, a large part of the liquidity support for the non-banking housing sectors, liquidity injection for the DISCOMs, special credit facility to the street vendors, an interest subvention scheme for the mudra loans for the people who are entrepreneurs, a housing plan for the mid-income groups, additional emergency working capital to the NABARD so as to build up the agricultural supply chain. Then then there is also a significant support for the Pradhan Mantri fish scheme. Then there is a support for operation grills, basically tomato, onion, potato, and infrastructure fund, an animal husbandry fund, promotion of herbal cultivation, beekeeping initiative, viability gap funding, and of course the MGA Nariga allocation. You also need to know that India also has an, as you have been listening also, that India has a significant amount of migrant laborers working, and these people also are going back home. So the government knows that there is a reverse migration happening. So they have amounted an additional 400 Indian rupees basically to these people, so that when they go back to these villages, they can also start working on building up the village infrastructure. And in fact, there are also reports right now that states like Uttar Pradesh is taking this advantage of building up the rural infrastructure. Of course, this could have some impact on some of the industry, but my sense is that I think this will also give a boost to the rural infrastructure, and possibly the rural demand could be the first demand to get kick-started because of this reverse migration. So we also need to look.
We project how many of the migrant laborers will stay at rural India, and the rest will come back to the cities as they were before?
See, I think right now we are doing a study of that. As you can know that, I mean, the number of migrant workers in India, I'll give you numbers. Basically, I think just give me 1 minute, I'll give you the overall number.
Israel is the migrant laborers are the people in rural India that come to work in the cities, and now when COVID started,
yes,
they went back to their villages.
So I think it's difficult to say, but I mean, in a nutshell, what I can say is that this will take a little bit amount of time. So a part of the migrant laborers has stayed back, but I think a large part of them has gone back, and maybe some part will start coming back after Diwali, because as you know, July to September is always a lean month, because that's a monsoon month in India when construction works takes a backseat. So even if they have gone back, I think in between, maybe some of them could come back after Diwali, but it all but it's still a little bit uncertain given the fact that we are in the midst of an COVID where there is a possibility of relaxation. So my sense is that this could actually take also maybe the more than a year also it could too, because these people need to be convinced once they come back. But the point which I'm trying to make is that while that is obviously a disadvantage, the advantage which we have to take from that is that we can use them in building up the rural infrastructure in the interregnum, so that at least the momentum to the economic activity is not lost because of this COVID crisis. Yeah. Next slide. This is basically the other thing. The RBI has also been significantly proactive. You can see this is the lot of rate cuts which different countries has done. Basically 115 basis points rate cut the RBI has done in the last 2 months, which is comparable with most other countries. And the RBI has also, and I just want to highlight a step by basically the Bernanke, the US the Fed Reserve Bank Fed chairman, is that the RBI has been taking a lot of discretionary, constant discretion policies in the last times. It's not acting from textbooks. It has given relief to the exporters. He had given relief to the importers. He had given relief to the people in terms of payments by extending the moratorium. And some of the suggestions of this actually has also come from the State Bank of India. But RBI has been most proactive in terms of supporting the economy in these times through changes in policies which are discretionary in nature.
Just for
Next
the
slide.
who is not privy to the acronyms, RBI is the central bank, the Reserve Bank of India.
Yes. So this is basically, and now I will come to some of the government measures. You can actually find some interest. I think the first thing which I need to say is that the government agricultural, actually the Indian government, I was going through some of the government officials' tweets. I found that these measures basically is now a 700-year law has now been abolished in India. This was done in the year 1300 and now it has been abolished. So basically the government is now will allow farmers to sell the crop from them to directly to the consumers. There will be a central law to link farmers with large retailers and big agro-based business. So this could shorten the farm to fork path. We have also trying to abolish the Essential Commodities Act. So I think these are significantly big steps as the agricultural sector is concerned. So I think we have to also, I know that Israel has done a lot on agriculture. I remember Israel, we had the luxury as opening to an Israel expert in agriculture 2 to 3 years back in one of our conclaves. But I think we have done a lot on agriculture. This is one area where Israel could actually come in and help India in terms of the agricultural sector, because the share of agricultural sectors in Indian economy of 2.8 trillion is 14%, which is not a big number. We have a big number, but we don't have cold storages, other things which we need to build up so that we can have a better price discovery. The other thing is basically the mining rules has been changed. The civil aviation now will have to be monetized the air routes. Power distribution will be privatized, and space will also bring private interest. The defense procurement, I think, could be a significantly.
Let me stop you here because you touched on the civil aviation, and in Israel, the airlines are suffering like anywhere in the world. How do you see the airlines in India? Jet has dropped, and what will happen to the rest?
No, I think that's a good point, but I think airline sector is going through a lot of challenges, and I don't foresee that the challenges will subside. But the government, what it is trying to do is it has tried to minimize the costs. The aviation sector, maybe at some point of time in the future, and once we recover from the pandemic, the government has actually, our honorable finance minister has said that we are still look into the sectors and see whether we can do more than what we have done. But I agree with the point the civil aviation sector in India is also largely challenged because for 2 months they have been stopped, and there are news, and I have been listening to tweet that there has been a lot of there has been some airlines also which have already applied for bankruptcy. So this is one sector which is challenged, but the government has tried to help the sector in whatever form it can do in terms of monetizing some of the airspaces, whereby it can give some relief to them in terms of the cost. But I agree with you that this is one of the sectors which is challenged.
Just to mention to everyone, Air India is back to flying to India, and so with Ethiopian Airlines. So if you'd like to reach India and get into maybe a lockdown, then flights are available now.
Yes. And the other thing, which is that the privatization of power distribution space has happened. So this is also happened. Defense procurements basically will now be a notified list. The defense hardware could open huge opportunities in the downstream for domestic manufacturing. This is one sector I think that Israel could actually help.
And
there has been
the defense FDI can grow now to 74%.
Yes, exactly. So that's a huge measure. There has been also technology-driven system in health. Education, for example, is now a large part of this now has going online. Administrative reforms, privatization of public sector units except in strategic sector. This will bring in the required efficiency in the working capital. So this is also another policy which the government will bring in. So basically all public sector units apart from the strategic sector will be privatized. Health and education is also being driven technologically. Then space and atomic energy will also be opened up for the private sector. You know that the Indian space and atomic energy programs are one of the most respected. So I remember, I'll just take 1 second to give us during 1985 to 1995, there's an empirical literature. I was going through one paper yesterday before coming to this conference, is that paper actually looked into 19 Latin American and Caribbean countries to see that whether you can use the crisis into an opportunity, and found that in 5 areas, notably banking sector, financial administrative reforms, banking, labor, taxation, you can show in large changes when the economy is actually going through some sort of a crisis. So I think these are large changes which the government has introduced. Possibly because of the COVID, this may have not given, may have escaped the attention. But I can tell you that in the defense, but the agricultural sector, the changes to the defense, and mostly the public sector, privatization of the public sector units, and opening up of space, atomic energy, I think power discom, shadow banking, all these are positive steps which the government has actually introduced. Next slide, please. Yeah.
Elaborate a bit about the health sector. We are in the COVID situation, so I guess that health is a major issue that should be into this scheme. What is
I'll come to that. I'll come to that next slide. That is the next slide. So I'll come to the last slide. I'll talk a little bit about the India-Israel trade profile. Just wanted to show that how big we can go. Indian exports to Israel is basically just 7% of India's total trade. So I think this is a humongous way to go. Indian exports to Israel is only, I think, growth at 10.5% last year. So this is a small number, around only 4 billion, which is nothing. India's total exports to Israel is also very small. And percentage share of exports to Israel in total exports is only 1.1%. So while India can also benefit, Israel can also benefit in terms of the total trade. And India's trade balance with Israel is basically only 1786. And percentage share of India's trade with Israel is 0.7%. So there's a huge opportunity for India and Israel to engage in trade activities. I think that actually shows that how Israel can communicate with India. Next slide. These are some of the sectors where there has been top Indian exports and Indian exported from Israel. These are some of the sectors like gems, electrical machinery, fertilizers, chemicals, organic, aluminium. So these are some of the sectors which India has actually, Israel could actually give the push to them. But I can tell you that there is a lot of significant things which India can do in terms of the trade, even if we just look into the trade profile, which is less than 1%. Last slide, please. So this is basically the final slide, and there I will actually talk about what, and I will just ask about the health sector. See, the first thing is that we have suggested, SPI has actually suggested some of the things the government has done. For example, there has been a credit guarantee fund which has been introduced by the government. This was actually one of the suggestions which was given by our SBI chairman, and this has been implemented by the government with a 3 lakh crores of package with full guarantee. So that will actually incentivize the banks to lend to the MSME sector. The other suggestion which we have given to the health sector through tax holiday for drugs, so that the government is considering. We are suggesting the government that given the huge government borrowing program this year, why don't you monetize that one by issuing perpetual bonds to RBI. Perpetual bonds is basically you don't pay any principal amount of them, you only pay an interest. So you just save on the debt servicing. And we actually, the government has created a 15,000 crore emergency health package. And we calculated that this could create an 80,000 crore demand over the next 4 years. This is in Indian rupees, but this means that rupees 150 billion. So you have to divide by 70. So find out the amount number. But this number of basically, it could create around 10 billion demand for the health sector in the US 10 billion in the next 4 years. So this emergency health package. We have also suggested that there should be a staggered package to first to green zones followed by orange and red. So the government is actually doing. And the final thing which SBI has suggested is basically the talk is going on is that why don't you have a professionally managed bad bank, whereby the bad bank was actually buy stressed assets from the banks at market value and makes an effort to resolve them with a time frame. Because right now most of our assets we have actually provided for. So these are some of
Explain to some of us what is the green, orange, and red zone that you refer to?
Yes. So basically, green, orange, and red zone is that what the government has done is that it has divided each states into 3 zones. One is red, whereby you can't have any activity. Where is orange, where you can have limited activity. Where you can green, where you can have all the activities. So the point which I'm trying to make is that the government is trying to first open up the green zones, then some of the activities in the orange zones, and then after the red zones. So, so basically we have also said that at least start construction activities in zones, green zones, whereby basically the green zones, whereby there is not a significant spread of the COVID disease. So that's why the government is actually going for a staggered package to first open up the green zones and then followed by the orange and red. So this is exactly what I wanted to say.
The good thing is if there is in areas like Orissa that there is no corona, then there was the cyclone. So
yes, so basically unfortunately there has been a cyclone in some parts of the country like West Bengal. Unfortunately this may have some impact on the spread of the disease, but these are all things which we can't say anything. But the only thing which we can hope is that once the lockdown is lifted, the recovery will also be sure. Because the point which I wanted to say is that don't look into an headline GDP number at this point of time, because that number could look ugly. But look into a GDP number for quarter wise. If the first quarter GDP number is very large, maybe -20, -30%, and even if we have a -5 to -10%, -5% GDP growth rate, even that means that the Q2, Q3, Q4 will be largely positive, which is the positive message we should try to take out of this GDP number. So we have to remain optimistic, and hopefully, we'll be able to overcome this crisis, because as I said, Indian population may have a hard mentality, because even with its health infrastructure, we have been able to, survive this disease to a large extent. But of course, this we have not reached a peak. Maybe we'll reach a peak in the June. And finally, what is the role of SBI? I think we have already said. I'll just highlight. FDI Indian, as I said, that all the announcement and Atmanirbhar package are favored for defense production, and SBI could actually help the Israeli companies in terms of a desk. We haven't, we have possible sectors of interest whereby Israel can come in and through our bank, like agriculture, defense, water treatment, pharmaceutical, electronics. There could be a partnership in defense production. There could be opportunities in artificial intelligence, high-tech warfare technology, and cyber security. IBC cases could be also taken up for lateral entry. And under Atmanirbhar Bharat, the recent packages could be favorable for this production. So Israel could actually tie up with India in terms of defense, in terms of agriculture, in terms of cyber security, in terms of pharmaceutical, electronics, and even in the IBC cases, where the cases are going to the IBC cases, where the cases are actually going to the bankruptcy court. We can actually the companies can help in seeing whether they can take and control the stake of the promoters.
Dr. Ghosh, you mentioned here the Atmanirbhar Bharat scheme, which is
yes.
In English, self-reliant. How is it going to become self-reliant with this scheme?
Yes, so basically that is some of the, I want to, just say that this Atmanirbhar Bharat basically means that the time has come India to get into self-reliant. This doesn't mean that this, I think there's a lot of, some people have confused that it is basically some sort of a protectionism. Is it actually not? It's trying to open up our country to our own advantage and create a domestic market within the country which will complement the export market. How we are creating the domestic market? Because in the agricultural sector we have a 1.3 billion population, and it's a tragedy that the farmers are unable to sell directly to this 1.3 billion population. So my point is that what the government is trying to make is that create a unified agriculture, create a unified market in India. So basically, one farmer, one India, one migrant laborer, one India, one Soumya Kanti Ghosh, one India. So everything today in one ration card. For example, now the government is talking about one ration card. That means that one ration card, one India. So basically, wherever you travel, you can use the same ration card in terms of drawing up your ration. So everything in India is now coming down to one India scheme. So that's actually the philosophy of the Atmanirbhar scheme. You have to be self-reliant. Your markets will be unified. The GST has actually made and the trade across 29 states seamless. So we have a self-reliant India, and add to that the exports. So the agricultural sector can now also export, because we will have all those price controls removed. So in a way, what we are trying to do will supplement our domestic capabilities and cater to a domestic market by unifying all states, all regions, all boundaries, all individuals, so that self-reliant is actually, and I will just want to take a quote from our former president, late President APJ Abdul Kalam, where he said that Atmanirbhar doesn't mean that, Atmanirbhar means basically you have your own prestige. So exactly the same point what you're trying to make over here is that we have to be, you have to your self-reliant, self-independent, keep your self-esteem, but at the same point of time build boundaries within the country and outside the world. India has strategic countries today with countries like Germany, Japan and Israel. SBI has always been a dependable banking partner in India. We have a 210-year history. So we are a banking partner in the Make in India Mittelstand program launched by the Embassy of India in Germany. India's Israeli bank's presence in India is limited, so that is one area. SBI can always have SBI's presence in Israel. We can always work out mutually beneficial agreement, and we can actually create an Israel desk in SBI for fast clearances. And I think this is, we have already, and as our CGM said, we have already have several desks. We can create the same desk in India, whereby the Israel companies could find it easy to come across, and we can actually answer all questions related to the policies in the different sectors. I'd like to stop here, and if you have any questions, if you can just let me know.
Yeah, I mean, you didn't talk about the rupee. Rupee.
Yes.
I like when it was round at 70. Now it's 76.
Yes, I'll talk about the rupee. I think I have answered the question about rupee in one of the slides. So if you have a current account surplus and if you have a balance of payment.
Ambassador Singla would like to say goodbye because he needs to drop off this call.
Yes. So basically my point is that if you have a current account surplus, if you have a balance support surplus, the rupee will also always have a tendency to appreciate. So that's one point which I'd like to mention. And if you look into the history of the 2009 crisis also, after the crisis, the Indian currency had appreciated. After that, it started to depreciate because there was a lot of other problems. Like if you remember, the US was downgraded at that point of time. So my sense is that as of now, we should not bother too much about the external sector, because of the simple fact is that if we have a situation where you have running a surplus with the rest of the world, that will bound to have a positive impact on your domestic currency, because ultimately that is the price of the external sector.
So, but still, I want to hear from you. The rupee will reach 80?
No, as of now, the rupee will not reach 80, but as I said, I think it's difficult to say the trajectory of the rupee, but right now the rupee will have an appreciative tendency. It will move in the current range of around the 76 to 78. Maybe it can appreciate a little bit as we progress and capital flows into the country. And once the investors see that the growth starts to pick up, then basically the rupee could actually have a positive bias. But for the time being, I am not witnessing a significant depreciation in the value of the rupee, because you also need to understand that oil prices will stay at low levels and 30% of our imports are actually from oil. So from that point of view, for the time being, rupee should move in the current range.
And you spoke about crude oil, and it reminded me of Iran, and then it reminded me of US, and then it takes us to the US-China conflict. How do you think that the trade war between US and China affects you, India?
So I think that's the data which I showed in the slide. I think any trade war should be made into an opportunity for India. And as I said to you, that even 1% of the China import shifts to India, India stands to gain significantly. We have I have a slide which I have not said over here, but is that India can actually gain significantly from China. India can gain significantly some of the supply, chains shift from China, and India can only, India can only benefit from that war with the US and China, because I think some of the treaties also India are being worked out. India is trying to work out with the trade deal with the USA. I think because of this COVID, there has been some amount of, this has not progressed so far. But my sense is that over a point of time, India can take significant advantage from the the China-US trade war. So I think, so we have to look from that point of view.
Okay, few questions that I have, and then we will pass it to the audience to place their questions. Israeli companies usually focus on the easy, I would say, easy to reach states such as Maharashtra, Gujarat, NCR, Karnataka, and maybe we're missing something. Can you point us to other states that Israelis should look at because of growth, because of incentives, because of whatever reasons that you can think of?
No, I think you are correct. There has been some of the states, for example, Maharashtra is one of them, Gujarat is one of them. But I can tell you that some of the states are now currently doling out a lot of incentives. For example, Uttar Pradesh is one of them. Uttar Pradesh has recently, some of the states like Uttar Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh has now some of them done away with some of the labor laws, which is very restrictive. So, and I think you should, not only you should look into the states in the western region, you should also look into the larger states. For example, a state like Uttar Pradesh has the size of a Brazil population. So each state in India is actually equivalent to one of the European states or Latin American states. I gave the example of the Uttar Pradesh. There are several states which are of the size of the country. For example, other countries. So I think not only Maharashtra, Gujarat, but you must also look into states which are also doing well, like Uttar Pradesh. Haryana also is giving out incentives. And in fact, smaller states, there are states on the eastern side also, the government is also giving a large push to the Northeast corridor. So, and there are some states which are, I can share the data with you, which gross state domestic product has been growing in double digits. Apart from Maharashtra, some of the eastern states, for example, West Bengal is one of them. Then
You're
Uttar Pradesh.
West Bengal, aren't you?
I was originally from West Bengal. Now I'm in Mumbai, but some of the eastern states also have done very well. And it is our motto that the Prime Minister has said that both the eastern and the western part of the country should do together well. My sense is that not Maharashtra, Gujarat, Tamil Nadu, you should also go down. You can also look into the states like Uttar Pradesh, then Madhya Pradesh. There is Rajasthan also over there. But my point is that look into states throughout India. Don't look into the two of the states. These are obviously, Maharashtra is always an advanced state. Around 10 to 15% of India's GDP comes from Maharashtra. But there are other states which are offering significant opportunities. I am sure that you will find an opportunity in each of the states. I can share with you separately the data for each of the states in terms of the ease of business ranking. We have the data, I can share it to you. But my limited point is that focus on India as an unit, because right now we have a unified country, one nation, one state, one country, one individual, and so that should be the motto. So invest anywhere, but that actually should always going to benefit India in terms of the market.
Thank you, Dr. Ghosh. Mr. Grossman, you had a question? You are mute, just a second. We can't hear you.
No.
Now we can. Go ahead.
Okay, sorry. Mr. Ghosh, it's slightly tough question. If you look, let's say, 2022, 2023, and you are trying to, what's going to be the remaining effects of this COVID in those years? In the sense that if we'll ignore it, I can assume that there was some kind of increase. How this increase will be affected by COVID? I mean, when we'll overcome, and because what you said, if you maintain those measures, it's supposed to be in a better position after the COVID, even better if it will be without the COVID, in that sense that you already stimulate the private sector and so on. So when you think that you'll benefit more than losing from those COVID effects?
I understand your point, but I think basically the problem is that you have 1/4 of your entire GDP which could be lost because of this coronavirus, because of this COVID crisis.
Yeah.
So any amount of package, and this is the point which I want to understand. The government has announced 10% of GDP, even if it was 20% of GDP, because one quarter, that means 25% of your GDP you are losing because 1/4 GDP. So now, how much percentage of stimulus you can give? I'm not talking about a stimulus. This is basically a support package which the government has given. So any amount of support would have been inadequate. The point which I'm trying to mention is that we have to live with COVID. Yes, we have challenges, but we also, I think, the Indian, if we look into this, I mean, in terms of the health infrastructure, we don't have a health infrastructure at this point of time. And we did not have a health infrastructure, but we have still managed to ward off some of the most deadliest diseases in India. Pneumonia is one of them, and we have a significantly small fatality rates. So I agree with you, that's a challenge. I will just highlight one data. Just give me 1 minute. I will highlight one data which is important. I mean, which we have actually suggested to the government. Just one second. I will just highlight one data. I think that we must, I mean, our health infrastructure as a developing economy, our health infrastructure is always needs to scale up. India is around, I think, more 700 districts. We have a good medical care in 200 districts. So what we have suggested is that in the balanced districts, if the government can build 500-bed hospitals in every district, and that cost of that, and even if it was to say develop 550-bed hospitals in every district, and out of this 500-bed hospitals in the next 3 years, if India were to build only 250 500-bed hospitals in say 50% of these districts, the total cost of that could be around only 20,000 crores per annum. That means 200 billion Indian national rupee per annum. So I think the government has, this is one of the suggestions which was given to the government. So the point is that it is better to build up the health infrastructure at this point of time. And you will be happy to know that one of the components of the Atmanirbhar package actually talks about this health infrastructure, building up this health infrastructure. And the government has announced a 15,000 crore support, 150 billion support, which we estimate can create a market for the health infrastructure of around 800 billion in the next 3 to 4 years. So yes, I agree with you that will be a challenge. It will be a hard climb. The numbers which will come out in the next 2-3 months will not be that good. But I can tell you that possibly next year could be far more better than what we are seeing this year. So that's actually one of the hopes we actually believe on.
Thank you, Mr. Grossman. We have an Indian friend with us today. Mr. Turkey, you had a question to Dr. Ghosh. You can unmute yourself.
Okay. I had one question, like for project financing, what type of guidelines does SBI, has SBI updated its guidelines, or does it have a general guideline that when a project is being built with an, say, Israeli partner or something like that, we would have a local partner, we'll have a consortium with an Israeli partner as well. So what guidelines does the SBI have to do in, say, sort of project financing? What type of equity is required? What type of financing they would give? What type of support they would give? Is there any guidelines as such?
No, I think our bank has well laid out policy guidelines. The credit guidelines are all well laid in terms of in terms of different rules. We have a separate credit policy, committees also. So I think once, if anyone is interested, I think you can always get in touch and we can provide the needful. But we have a well laid out policy and procedures for each and every sectors, in terms of what could be the sector cap, in terms of the sector exposure, in terms of the risk rating, in terms of how much amount you can take, in terms of the consortium, in terms of everything. We have a well laid out policy. And if anyone is interested, I think we'll be very glad to handle them. And I think our Israel CEO, Mr. Ramanna sir, or our CDM sir can also provide some highlight on this.
Thank you very much.
I think you can approach us. You have my contact numbers. With all your queries, we'll be able to support you and we'll be able to clear your doubts about this project finance matters. We have a very clearly laid down policy in the bank, and it is again divided into different sectors. Clear policy for different sectors. It's a project finance department. It's a department, a specialized department in the bank.
Is it available on your website?
Must be available. Otherwise, I can provide you.
Ramana, I'll take this. You see, each project is different. So whatever project that you are having in your mind, I have given the mail. You can talk to Ramana also. You can send a specific query, because each one has got its own uniqueness in terms of financing. So my request will be give you a query specifically. We'll answer with all the clarifications, all guidelines, all supports.
We have a question. Thank you, sir. We have a question here from the diamondeers of Israel, an industry which is common to Israel and India, and they are asking about the credits that you're going to give to the diamond community in India and in Israel, of course.
For financing diamond industry, we have a separate diamond industry policy. So as explained by Dr. Ghosh just now, each industry has got a defined policy, different parameters laid down. So all the policies that we implement in India are also applicable to foreign centers as well. So whatever the policy prescription is available, definitely we'll do it. And this policy has been designed in consultation with the diamond traders in India. In fact, they wanted certain inputs. We have taken them, we have discussed with them. The entire policy has been designed in consultation with the diamond traders. So whatever that he has, he can raise a question, because it's a specific question related to specific industry. We can answer in a much better way. The query is much more clearer and sent to us.
Thank you, Mr. Satya. We have a clarification from Anat Nenner from Open Sky Air India in Israel, saying that flights were not resumed yet, but for the flight tomorrow. So thanks, Anat, for clarifying it. We have a question from Gadi Aryav. Gadi, you can, I'll start with your video, and you, Professor Gadi Aryav from Tel Aviv University. Gadi, you need to unmute yourself. I cannot do it. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. You know, everybody is talking about resilience, and it was interesting to observe the Indian resilience, resilient response. The point that I was trying to make is, you know, ultimately the course of the economic crisis will not change until the medical crisis is put under control. Current estimates, realistic estimates, is about 18 months. So my question is about the sustainability of the Indian stimulus package. Can it be spread over the next, you know, 2.5 years? Is that realistic to assume that this will be continued for the next 2.5 years?
I think that's a good question, and as I have said in the midst of my presentation, that the Indian government has clearly said that this is not the end of the package. Once the economy moves out of the lockdown, which looks that it may take a little while, because since we have not peaked, so our lockdown is still till the end of this month, but we will have to see how much we can move out of the lockdown, because June will be also a tough month for us.
Yeah.
So once the economy moves out of the lockdown, I think the government will look into each of the sectors, and then they have said that whatever required will do to bring the economy back into steps. So I think the Reserve Bank and the government is conscious about it. So I'll not be surprised if more steps are taken towards the end, after the economy gets into an active mode. Because right now there is no point in supporting it, because right now is only a survival phase. So
Yeah.
once the growth phase comes and the rebound phase comes, I think more support will be needed.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Ariaptek. Thank you, Dr. Ghosh. We have Gad Knan online. Gad, would you like to ask your questions live? Just a sec. So until he comes on, he was asking, in Israel, for example, Dr. Ghosh, we let go or gave holiday to employees. And I understand that that's not what happened in India, and most company kept or fired their employees. Mr. Knan was asking, is there any support the government is planning to give to small companies that keep the head count and didn't let go of people?
And I think the government has provided support to the MSME sector, I think, in terms of a credit guarantee fund. And it has said that one of the purposes of the credit guarantee funds is in terms of the salary compensation. So I think the government is, that this fund which is guaranteed by the government will provide easy loans to these companies so that they can actually survive during this time period. So while an explicit package is not there, but there is a support through the indirect mechanism through the financial intermediaries like banks to handle these SME units.
Okay, we have with us Sudhir Mehta. Sudhir, you have a question you would like to...
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Ghosh. I just want to ask, what would be the impact of this stimulus on the agriculture and drip irrigation and modern techniques in Indian farming, basically?
No, I think the agricultural sector, the steps which the government has done is quite commendable. In the last, I think I just want to step back and say a few things. I think there has been some fundamental changes also in the agricultural sector in the last 3 to 4 years, because a farmer has not only doing agriculture right now, he has also moved into doing allied activities. So that's why you'll also find a lot of support in terms of the allied activities like fishing, horticulture, fishing, beekeeping, and these activities has been given prominence in the package. So my point is that this package which has been giving an irrigation, I think deep irrigation, and there has been some successful models in some of the states. For example, Maharashtra had a successful model. And my sense is that, this has to be implemented. Whatever steps the government has taken in terms of price discovery and mechanism, this has to be implemented. Otherwise, it will be difficult to identify it will be difficult to get the benefits of this announcement which has been made in the Atmanirbhar package. So in short, what I like to say that the impact of all this on drip irrigation will be positive in the medium term, but we also need to see that these are taken to the logical conclusion, because we have been grappling with these problems for a while, and now it's time that we take this head on.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Ghosh. We have 2 last questions, and then we'll start to wrap it up. We have with us Srirang from Bombay. Srirang, you can place your question.
Good afternoon, Dr. Ghosh. My question was that most of the measures taken by RBI to pump in liquidity have resulted in liquidity, but most of it is being parked in reverse repo by the banks. And actual industry or the economy is not benefiting out of that liquidity. So when do you foresee that the liquidity will actually start reaching the industry and economy?
No, I think, see, there is 2 years of looking into the thing. I think this question has been also been floating around, that liquidity. I think there is a simple distinction over here, the liquidity which has been given by the RBI, that is separate from the credit which a bank extends. So for example, just to take one, I mean, if a bank were to expand credit, that doesn't mean that the reverse repo will go up or go down, because there is no linkage. But having said that, the simple point is that in the month of March, the April data will come on 31st May, but on the March 31st, in the last 7 days of March, the credit expanded by the banks to the NBFC sector and to the large industry. The incremental credit for the all scheduled commercial banks to the industry and the NBFCs, which are basically the most affected sectors, were the highest since 2008 crisis. So, and in April, the trend is that in April, most of this credit comes back because you make a repayment. But this time, the welcome departure is that that money has not come back into the system. That means the companies are actually conserving cash so as to pass through this cycle. So while the point which we're making is actually that when the credit growth will pick up, I think as of now, the credit growth will take some time to pick up, because as long as the economy doesn't get out of the lockdown mode, it is difficult to say and difficult to disburse, and common banking activities are all actually now stopped. So for example, you cannot go to a branch and take a home loan like that, although there's a lot of companies are trying to foresee through online, but that's not possible to that extent. So my sense is that once the economy picks up, there will be some amount of activity obviously gaining momentum. But from the banking side, I can tell you that whatever has been possible in the month of March, and also, for example, State Bank of India was the first bank to announce an enhancement of the working capital loans, which has been, and if you can look into the data, a large part of these companies have approached SBI and taken moratorium on their term loan repayments and also on the working capital loan. So banks are actually trying to help the companies. Now it's the time actually to handhold the companies so as to help them to tide over this cash flow crisis. So instead of loans getting at facelift right now, the issue is that you handhold them throughout this crisis, let the moratorium get over, and then see how they can recover from that. So from that point of view, I think we have to look into it a little bit differently. So credit growth as of now may not see a significant recovery because the economy is still closed. So whatever is possible on the side of the banks are trying to do it, but as you know, there are constants. So hopefully, I mean, some of these constants will get addressed over a point of time.
Thank you, Srirang. Thank you, Dr. Ghosh. One last short question from you, Mr. Nanavati. You were waiting to place your question.
Hi, Soumya. My name is Ajay Nanavati. I was till recently the chairman of Syndicate Bank, and prior to that, I was managing director of 3M Israel and 3M India. My question was, on one of your slides on competitiveness, the two parameters where we dropped dramatically was on labor markets and skills. You really haven't made any reference to that as a challenge, because I think global investors, those are some key elements that they look for. And on that latest slide that you showed on global competitiveness, those were the two parameters where we tended to have dropped dramatically. How do you see going forward that changing, and why?
No, I think that's a good point. In terms of the labor market, I think our labor policies, factor market policies, these are actually politically sensitive issues in terms of labor market policies. For example, if you remember when states like Uttar Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh, Gujarat, all these made changes, even Assam made changes, there was a lot of hue and cry. But I think in the before the budget, the government has made an attempt into that. It has unified, I think, 4 of the labor policies into one of the codes. So we are trying to make a progress on that. And in terms of the skilling, I think skilling is of course an extremely important factor, because this is one of the things where has been repeatedly said in different circles that India's skilling, which is basically happening, may have to be pushed a little bit. I think these are some areas where we need to also work with. Labor is one area where we are working, and skilling actually needs to be scaled up a little bit from the current levels than what we are currently doing. But obviously, I think the labor, we need to do much more than what we are doing, and hopefully some of the changes which we have done in the last 1 month before the COVID are actually translated into proper actions when the economy opens up.
Thank you, Ajay. Good to see you again. We miss you in Israel, and thanks.
Exactly.
We have with us also a representative, head of the Israel desk at Invest India, Atar Mankotia. Atar, why don't you present yourself for a short bit and share with the Israelis what Invest India has to offer. Most of us know Deepak Bhatta well, and we know Invest India, but we have attendees that are new to India, so please elaborate in few words.
Sure. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for the, Mr. Ghosh for the, the detailed presentation. Some of the points touched upon were very, very relevant. Invest India is, the investment promotion and facilitation agency under the Ministry of Commerce. Essentially, our role and our job is to promote ease of doing business and facilitate FDIs and investment in the country. We also look at policies and regulations which are pertaining to ease of doing business. Hi, am I audible? Yeah.
Yes, a few things somehow unmuted. Okay, I'll
you need to mute Gad Knan.
That's okay, managed. Go ahead.
Sure. So again, touching upon the detailed presentation made by Mr. Ghosh, he touched upon the fact that there were plenty of reforms that have come in both pre-COVID as well as post-COVID. Invest India, under the aegis of the Ministry of Commerce, has been working extensively with several government agencies as well as industry to streamline some of the industry recommendations. India, one great point that Mr. Ghosh had made earlier was India is, such a sizable country that each and every state alone is, equivalent to a country in either the European Union or from Latin America. Definitely the COVID-19 situation has impacted the economy of India. We are looking at driving investments now. We are looking at driving FDIs. There have been several reforms, norms, both that have been announced, as well as those that are in the process of being announced as we speak. The electronics schemes that have come out in the last couple of months should, lead to a sizable increase in investments in India. They are created and they have been implemented for the streamlining of investments into that particular space. The type of incentives across different states would be handed out for electronics manufacturing in India. So that's one area we're looking at.
And
similarly,
the contact person in Invest India for Israeli companies that want your assistance.
Yes, so we have an extensive Middle East desk here at Invest India, which looks at all the Middle Eastern countries. I lead the entire initiative for the entire all the investments that come from Israel. We have a strong team of about 8 representatives who work across different, even though we are focusing on different countries within the Middle East, we do work collaboratively across, in investments from Israel. Some of the representatives here, both in the attendees as well as the panelists, were part of our last engagement, which was a detailed roundtable, which were on the investments of Israeli companies in India, which was held on, where His Excellency Dr. Ron Malka was also present. So we are looking also extensively at Israel to come and, invest in India. There have been significant opportunities that the countries have been collaborating on. R&D is one of them. There have been a couple of recent policies that have come out where there are tax reforms and tax benefits of close to about 150%, that are going to be given to the R&D on an incremental investment basis. So we are in the process right now. Our Minister of Commerce, we are part of several dialogues and several webinars and several meetings wherein he is sourcing information, he is sourcing best practices, he's asking the industry, not just in India, but across the world, for what reforms can we actually implement right now.
I think that, Atar, what we can do is do a separate session with you and your team.
Yes. Yes.
And then we can elaborate more about what you can do for us and what are the opportunities available for the Israeli companies. So I think that we will discuss it post this webinar.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you. Before we do some more introductions that I wanted us to do, is some promotion to our next event on Tuesday, June 2nd. The Israel-Asia Chamber of Commerce will be holding a breakfast meeting with ASHRA. It will be still a webinar. ASHRA for the Indians is the Foreign Trade Risk Insurance, which is actually an excellent marketing tool. On Monday, June 15, we're going to hold with FICCI, the Federation of Indian Chambers of Commerce, B2B meetings in the telemedicine. Stay tuned, we'll share with all of you, and we will do additional B2B meetings along with the members of FICCI Chamber of Commerce and with the FICCI Ladies Organization. On Thursday, May 28th, this week, on Thursday actually, there is a Cybertech Asia. I'll later share with all the participants here more details, and you can find also on the Facebook page of the Israel-Asia Chamber of Commerce all this information, including the streaming of this event, and you can leisurely go through the presentation of Dr. Ghosh and learn more from it. And we're opening a Hindi for business people in collaboration with State Bank. The Corona a bit stopped us, but we intend to go back to that now that Israel is almost back to normal. And with the Indian Embassy, we are issuing Doing Business in India booklet, again, stopped by the COVID, but we are back to that very soon. I wanted to bring Mrs. Ronnie Adidia, which is going to be our DCM in Delhi soon. Ronnie, why won't you say a few words, and then I'll pass the mic to you, Natasha.
Hi, namaste, shalom, everyone. It's very nice to virtually meet you. Some of you I have already met in the past, but it's good to see so many people interested in the relations between India and Israel. I will be going to India at the end of July, Air India and COVID willing. I'm very much looking forward to arriving in India. I've been in India a few times in the past, and I've fallen in love with the country, and so I'm really looking forward to this. I do want to say that even if I don't necessarily open the communications with you, please feel free to open communications with me. If there's anything at all that you think that maybe the embassy will be able to help you, sometimes we come across obstacles or problems that we really don't know how to overcome, but very often just a word from the embassy can help to smooth things along and to make things happen. So anything at all that I can do in order to help the business relationships or the economic relationships between Israel and India, I'm happy to do, and I'm more than willing to. Please don't hesitate. Just a little bit about myself. I've been in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs as a career diplomat for 26 years almost. This will be my 5th posting abroad. I've been posted to Turkey, Russia, the United States, and the UK. So this will be a new experience for me, and I'm really looking forward to it, and I'm looking forward to getting to know each and every one of you personally. So thank you very much for this opportunity, and not to say hello to everyone, and I look forward to continuing the relationship.
All the best.
Thank you, Ronnie. And we have with us also Natasha Zangin, which is going to replace Mr. Barak Granot as the commercial attaché in New Delhi. Natasha?
Hi everyone. It's very nice to meet you all. I think it's a great opportunity to see some of the faces behind of the email addresses, and I want to thank you, Anat, for taking this initiative, this very important initiative, and of course, thank you for all the notable participants in this seminar. I'll be arriving to New Delhi probably at mid-September. this is the aspiration. I hope it will be possible due to the circumstances. Looking forward to working with each and every one of you, and please feel free to contact me. And I'm hoping to do at least as good job as Barak Granot, the commercial attaché, so far has done.
Thank you, Natasha. It's time to take a group picture and say final thank yous for this webinar. Unfortunately, both ambassadors had to rush to their respective engagements. So I thank Ambassador Sanjeev Singla, Ambassador of India to Israel, for joining us today. And so to Dr. Ron Malka, our ambassador in New Delhi. Thanks for all the commercial attachés, consul generals, DCMs to be, commercial attachés to be. To you, my friend, my dear, dear friend, Mr. Ramana, which together we plotted this wonderful morning. Thank you, Mr. Satya Narayan, for your friendship as well, and for allowing us to have State Bank of India in Israel, a partner to promote business between Israel and India. And of course to you, Dr. Ghosh, for taking more than 2 hours of your precious morning, or actually afternoon time on a Sunday, and sharing with us this wonderful knowledge and experience that you have. And I reserve the right to reach out to you again when things clear up and we know what's going to happen, and hear your wisdom and knowledge. So thank you, Mr. Ghosh.
Thank you. Thank you.
We will share with all of you the presentation, the slides that Dr. Ghosh will to share with you. And also you can watch it on the Facebook page. We will have a recording of this session. And now we will move to a group picture. So put a big smile on your face. And I'm going to take a few pictures, screen pictures of this session today. I thank Amnon Offen for joining us, my deputy at the chamber, and Danny Katarivas from the Manufacturer Association is with us. And thanks APM Law for joining us this morning and partnering with us and being a partner for all our India events. Thank you, Mr. Grossman. Raviv, my friend, thanks for joining me, and Matan. And I can mention all of you. So this is one picture, and then I'll move to the next picture, and then I'll move to the third one, because we have a lot of participants today. I thank the administration manager of this webinar, Mrs. Liron Urman, which I borrowed from the Women Forum of China, Israel, and now I dragged her into the India affairs. So have a wonderful week. Chag Sameach. To Indians, it means happy holiday, towards the holiday that we have at the end of this week. And bear with us for the future events of our chamber. And as I mentioned, the next one will be Tuesday, June 2nd, webinar breakfast with Ashra. All details will be shared with you later today. Thank you all for joining. And if you have more questions, I'll be able to write it to Dr. Ghosh, and in his spare time, he will answer our questions. So have a good day. Shalom, toda, namaste.
Thank you.
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 Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
Namaste.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for joining.
Thank
It was a
you.
great session.
Thank you very much. It was very insightful.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you, Anat.
Bye-bye. Thank you so much.
Thank you.